Hey everyone, we have the privilege of having a really great conversation today that I think you'll really be encouraged by whoever's going to be watching this. So on the screen with me today is my friend Lisa. Hi, Lisa.
Hello.
So I've been at Rock Point as a pastor for that past couple of years. One of the first people I got to know, one of the first, I don't know, it's one of those days already. Is Lisa. We were working together on some ministry stuff in a housing secure initiative, other things. Anyways, outside of all of that ministry stuff, we became friends as well, and love hanging out with Lisa. And the reason for this interview today is that Lisa has recently completed master's studies, and we're going to be talking about what she studied and what she wrote about. But before that, Lisa, how are you?
I'm good. It is way too early for winter, though. I am not
Oh my
thrilled
God.
with this development at all.
It is a winter wonderland outside. For those of you who may be watching from other parts of the world, even, it looks like a white blizzard, middle of winter. It looks more like February in Calgary than it does October. But
Yeah.
here we are nonetheless.
Yes,
There's always the chance, though, Lisa, that in like 2 weeks it's all gone and it's like plus 14.
exactly. Like, I'm holding out hope.
Here we go. So over the course of your study, I'm going to bring this up. This word that's on the screen now, theomaky, is what
Mouthful.
is what you studied. So would you give us um, a sense of what it is that we're talking about and what it is you wrote about?
Mhm.
What is theomaky?
So it's this was my thesis topic for my master's. I just got my certificate in the mail this week, actually. So I'm
Hey,
legit a master. I don't know if I get like a Jedi, lightsaber or anything with it. I'm kind of hoping that comes soon.
not from me. You
No.
won't.
Thanks for
You
stealing
got
my
you
dream.
got your thumbs
No,
up.
yay.
Hey, yeah.
So this was my thesis topic, and it's been a topic or an idea that I've been forming for a while. So I figured, go big or go home. School's all about hubris. So why not just, write your thesis on an area of theology that in that, 2000 years worth of writing about the Bible, we feel so there's a chance nothing's been forgotten or missed, but I feel like there is. So I
Hmm.
figured I would go big or go home and write my thesis on Theomaky. So what I kind of found in the process of not only writing it, but in my experience of my faith, recognizing there was kind of, I felt there was a theme in the Bible that I felt hadn't really been brought out explicitly, and that was theomaky, or in a theological context I'm calling it theomacology, so the study of theomaky. And basically, theomaky is a hybrid of two Greek words, theo meaning God and mach meaning war. And it was actually a term used by people that study Greek mythology. And it's used in reference to stories in that legends about when the gods and the men would war
Hmm.
and fight. And so I've kind of
So like
co-opted it.
divine human conflict is basically
Exactly,
what we're
conflict
talking about.
between the divine and humanity. um yeah, so I co-opted it and created this area of study, and I'm proposing that there's a missing part of our theology. It is present, not in these terms, within other faith groups, and other ideologies like Judaism has more of an understanding of wrestling with God, but that's really what it is. It's looking through the Bible and showing a consistent theme throughout the whole Bible of contention with God. So wrestling with God, arguing with God, complaining, working things out, kind of that combative kind of element of a faith journey. And so I feel like there's some really necessary, applicable parts of this that I feel like would really help the church and help pastors and faith leaders, spiritual mentors, as they kind of engage with people who are in a journey of faith and come to a point where they're in that dark night of the soul, where they're really wrestling with doubt and with questions. And so I wanted to write my thesis and maybe potentially a dissertation. There's definitely a book forming about it. Kind of exploring it in deeper context.
So with any kind of course of study, as I've done studies myself, there's always a personal reason. I mean, if it's just simply academic, would probably lose motivation about 3 days into study.
Yep.
And so obviously for you, there's something about this that I would think is there's a personal side to it. And I think the question that's in that is what inspired you to study theomaky? What was it that was happening, whether in your own journey, in your own life, that brought you to the point that says not only is there something probably missing in theological discourse, there's something perhaps in my own journey that I'd love to dig into. So what was it for you that not only inspired you to begin, but to see it through?
So I've always described my relationship with God. If there was a picture to describe it, it'd be WWF wrestling match. Like it's uncouth, it's not super dignified, and it's messy. um, and overly dramatic. So I've always been a wrestler. My mom used to say that when I was a little girl, I'd always ask why and why and why and why until I felt like I got a reasonable answer. And then finally, she figured out if she just gave me the most complex answer ever, I was too proud to admit I didn't understand what she was saying. So I'd stop asking her. But this idea of kind of wrestling and not accepting kind of the status quo, that's definitely been present within my kind of human interactions and human relationships, and has very, very much been present in my relationship with God. And there was kind of a seminal season for me in my early 20s. I had been a pastor of out at a summer camp, and some three of our full-time staff. So I had a staff of 50 I was leading, and I was the pastor for the summer. And three of them were killed 3 days before our first camps in a head-on car accident. And that they were the first kind of young people I'd ever lost in my life. And obviously leading, a staff of 50 young people, a lot of whom had grown up with these three through this, it raised a lot of questions. And about 2 weeks after that happened, another one of our workers was on a weekend trip with his family and fell off a cliff climbing. And he landed, and we were like, Donovan's fallen, pray, pray, pray so that he's healed and he doesn't, he's not going to be paralyzed. And it didn't look very promising because he'd fallen from quite a height. And I remember sitting in the room praying for Donovan in exactly the same room we had prayed before we'd found out that the other staff members had been lost. And I just was like, and Donovan actually had a full recovery. And when we knew that Donovan was going to be miraculously healed and was saved from that, I really was quite thrown by why we get some answers that we want from prayer, and both situations were desperate, were life and death. God said no to one and yes to another, and that made me really start to wonder, how do you trust God? How do you trust prayer? It can't just be based on the answers we get. There has to be something deeper with that. And I felt like he had completely abandoned me and had become a very suspect character to me. And I remember chatting with somebody that summer and going, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Mr. Beaver says to the kids, I think one of the kids says, so is Aslan good? And he's like, well, yes, he is. And somebody says, is he safe? And it's almost like Mr. Beaver is completely scandalized by that. And he's like, no, he is good, but he's not safe. And that hit really hard when I read that line in that book that summer. And that sent me off into a real quite a long season of really deconstructing my faith, because I wasn't a big fan of God.
Mhm.
And the sovereignty that he has to make life or death decisions was really scary and problematic to me. And so there was a lot of wrestling. And in that season, obviously reached out a lot to spiritual mentors and to pastors. And I had one conversation with a spiritual mentor of mine, and he said, and it pained him to say this, so I have deep empathy for him in this, but he was like, I think if you leave the door open at all to walk away, your faith is not, I'm not sure you're actually a Christian. I think you need to question whether your faith has been real. And I walked away just like devastated by that, and got in my car broken, shouldn't have been driving, was crying profusely, and felt such a one of the only times I feel like I've ever heard God really talk deeply, like clearly to me. And I felt a real clear sense of God saying, that was not me. he's not speaking for me. You're fine and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And just keep being honest in the journey. Went to seminary and had a great seminary professor who helped give me some perspective and gave me space and safety to really start to explore this. And slowly through that journey, and then as it's kind of played out and as God has brought countless people in a period of deconstructing their faith to me over the last decade or couple of decades, I feel, oh, I just told you how old I am. Just pretend you didn't hear that. We can edit that part out. I
Oh, there's no
felt like
editing. I'm not that good. This is as is, Lisa. Sorry.
I've realized that this is actually a really common experience, and it's not that people are sinning by being in this space. And as I explored that, I'm like, so if they're not sinning, what is it? And I really feel in my study, from what I've seen in Bible and walking a long time with people who have been in a similar journey, I actually believe that this is a legitimate tool of discipleship that God does. So I think he provokes a fight, and he makes us question who he is and his character, and he does it knowing that there's a good chance people legitimately may go, I don't think you're good, I don't want this, and they may walk away. But it's a risk I think he's willing to take to get to the heart of who that person is and their belief in him. Yeah, so that's kind of like my journey with it, and really wanting to provide a safe place for people not to be rebuked and to not have the integrity of their faith questioned. But you do need to do theomaky to do it well. You need to do it. You need to step in the wrestling ring with a community around you, because the enemy tries to manipulate that season, and you're very vulnerable to that.
Sure. And I think that's one of the things that, as our conversation continues, you mentioned that, I mean, this, when you describe what theomaky actually is, it is a common human experience. I mean, for people of faith everywhere, you could say theomaky, people are like, I don't know what that is. When you describe what it actually is, contending with God, wondering about God, I think anybody that's walked with God for more than 3 hours has this sense that all is not well. This doesn't always match up.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're subjected to teaching all the time around and all sorts of sources that basically puts difficulty or pain down to, well, it's your choice, it's your lack of faith, it's whatever else. And your whole position that you're promoting here is saying this is a journey that's done with God. Like God is initiating something. He is drawing something out through that, which I think in many ways changes our perspective on prayer. What is it we're doing when we're actually praying? What are those seasons like? How many times have we heard people talk about, I'm in a wilderness? And we're like, what does that mean? Or God seems silent these days. So we have all sorts of ways of describing what you've coined as theomaky. And so I guess my next question is, if this is such a common experience and we see it, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, but there's examples, one of these threads that weaves through the scriptures is this idea of wrestling with God, contending, whatever else. The next question is, why do you think then, if it's so common, why do you think understanding theomaky has been absent from, I'm going to say, the North American church experience? Because honestly, in my travels and living in other parts of the world, although not using that term,
Yes,
there's other faith communities around the world, Christ followers, that get this better, I would say.
yes,
That's
yeah,
just that's a
agreed.
generalization. We don't need to dig into that. But for the church that we're a part of now, this North American church, evangelical wing of Christ following, whatever else it is, as much as we don't like that word these days, for something so common, why has it been absent? Why are we, in one sense, many of us, starting to just awaken to the possibility that this is something?
So I think, so I can only speak from kind of my experience of it, right? And what I've seen from other people's journeys.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's scary. And having been the spiritual mentor of people in this place as well, it's hard work to mentor somebody in this season,
Mm-hmm.
because there is no pat answers. And I find often there is a deep desire, and maybe pastors in particular feel like it's their job to defend God and to defend doctrine and belief, and that is true. Like, you guys are shepherds of that, for you teach truth, but I think there's a great fear that settles in a leader's heart and I think it gets wrapped up in a leader's personal own vested interest in the state of their congregants or the people that they're leading and mentoring. That what have I done wrong that this person has ended up in this season? What are they doing that isn't right that leads them to this place? And frankly, a lot of the teaching that we've had for years, for sure, my growing up, is that if you're feeling a distance from God, God's not the one that moved. That's garbage. That is absolutely 100%
Yeah, how
not
many times
true.
have we heard that? You moved away from him, he didn't. There's no distance the other way. Yeah.
Yeah. And that he's not silent. It's that your heart is hard because of sin. And these are not scriptural, and they're not helpful. But we've been taught that for a long, long time, that if there's a problem in our relationship with God, we are the problem. Now, let me clarify. We are the problem in our relationship with God. He is a perfect being. But his grace is sufficient for all of that. So if we're experiencing a problem, it's not because of how we're engaging with God. There's something else at play. So sometimes it is our sin. And that's the really confusing part, right? Is that you have to mine
Can be.
through the
Yeah.
reality of your life, right? To figure out what
Yeah.
it is. I think it's missing because it's not happy. It's not comfortable. And I think if I had to define the themes that the North American church really wants to promote, is that a life with Jesus gives you a happy, comfortable life where he provides everything you need. And that is 100% privileged North American viewpoints. That's
Right.
not how a lot of the world's understanding of a relationship with God is. So I think it's uncomfortable. I think it scares. So that my personal journey, I think I scared a lot of people. Like there was one point where my mom was like, you have got to stop talking to people about this. You are scaring them. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's been a lot of the feedback, a lot of rebuke and correction. And I feel like, to be fair, I feel like it's been really lovingly given, to be honest. I don't feel like they were attempting to harm me or hurt me at all. They were concerned for where I was at. However, they weren't speaking for God in that situation. And it did intensify the pain of being a period of deconstruction is excruciatingly painful for the person going through it. That's what I wish people would understand. When somebody is falling away from the Lord or walking away or whatever, however we phrase that, if it's a
Backslidden.
legit journey,
Backslid. Remember that term, Lisa?
backslidden. Yeah,
The
they're
backslider.
backslidden Christian because you listen
Yeah.
to like Madonna or something.
I had to destroy my Bruce Springsteen tape when I was younger because of caused me
Even
to backslide.
I've
Anyhow,
had to
sorry.
buy my music over and over again
I
because I
know.
would get but I think it's there. Yeah, I think it's that belief that we're doing something wrong if there's something wrong in our relationship with God. And so I think it's kind of a mixture. And then obviously the individual person, that's involved in being the spiritual mentor has their own lens and filters that they bring to the table as well.
Sure.
So I think it just doesn't line up with, I think, the North American church, and I'm super overgeneralizing, but I think the North American
Yeah.
church generally would consider this blasphemous. That God smote the Israelites in the desert because they complained. This is complaining and murmuring. There is no place
The
for that.
grumbling attitude. Yeah. That whole.
Yeah.
And I think you make a very fascinating point to me in that I think there's a narrative for anyone watching, yes, these are massive generalizations. I know there's exceptions to it all, but for the sake of this conversation, generally within the evangelical movement of North America, I think even since the holiness movement of the late 1800s, revivalist movement, all those sorts of things, the whole idea of coming to Jesus or being reconciled to God, forgive me for my crassness, the sales pitch was that in entering into this time with God, sin goes away, temptation lessens. It's not the promised land yet. We know heaven's to come, but this is basically a pretty good taste of it. It's a life improvement. Someone called it the gospel got reduced to a sin management program and a life improvement plan.
Yes.
And so if that's the narrative, hey, you come to Jesus, you get washed clean, and now you're kind of on the way to glory, to come in with Theomaky, which says, this journey will now be a wrestle. This is going to be difficult. There are going to be things about God that remain mysterious, perhaps maddening to you, that you don't just stuff away. Now you bring them into community. That doesn't fit the narrative of a sin management program and a life improvement plan. And I think you make a great point that in the selling of religion, again, a crass term, this doesn't sell. So some may call it blasphemous, whatever else, but
Who'd sign up for that?
that's what I mean. You start talking to people, you should follow Jesus and engage in this life of faith. And by the way, here's the other side of the coin. It doesn't make it very attractive. And yet, wouldn't you say that with everything we've gone through in evangelicalism, this kind of authenticity with the generations coming is exactly the kind of honesty and authenticity that people are longing for? Wouldn't you say?
Hands down. So I've talked to many different friends, particularly as I've been in the process of researching and writing, Christian, non-Christian, different faiths. And there's been a few times when I've talked with non-Christian friends of mine, and they're like, well, what are you doing your thesis on? And I kind of, explained it. One of my friends just broke down weeping, not a Christian at all. And she's like, I feel like there's something inside of me that just feels that. And if that's what it was to be in a relationship with God, I would actually be interested in that. And I was like, oh. And again, I'm like the worst evangelist on earth. Like, Jonah's got nothing on me. If I have to like outright share my faith, it's like it's horrible. And yet in the process of this, so many opportunities, and that message, particularly with Christians, and I would say with the younger generation of Christians, particularly with them, there is a huge movement to deconstruction and to trying to really discern what are the core beliefs, and what do I think about these. And there's a lot of pushback and rebuke that comes, I find, from church culture with those questions, and a lot of deciding, well, that person's not a Christian anymore. The questioning of the integrity of your faith is painful, and it actually boots them right out of the door, instead of creating space to go, you can say whatever blasphemous thing you think you need to say. We're going to walk this together. And if you choose at the end of this to not follow Christ, I will still love you and walk with you. I don't feel like just walk across the room or Contagious Christian has really covered that. Like that love for people beyond project. But this authenticity, so there was people that were like, you need to be careful that you don't talk about this with non-Christians, or about the wrestling that I was going through. It makes, it might make people doubt the truth of God and things like that. And yet I have never, ever found that. In fact, I feel like it has made Christianity accessible, and a potential choice for people, because they know they are not perfect. They know they cannot meet a standard of holiness. And so we, I think, not always intentionally, make it seem like you can't approach God until you've reached a certain point of okayness with God. And that is absolutely counter biblical. And I feel like this has made a space for people to go, oh, you don't have to be perfect. I could come with all of the mess and the questions I have. Yeah, like you're probably like a mile ahead of the people that are posturing like they have it all together, actually. So bring it. And the other thing is, I think for me, it just seems really counterproductive. Doesn't he know what we're thinking anyway? Like, why pretend we've got it figured out if he already knows that we don't? Why not just like, what more could be gained by just being honest with him and letting him engage in where we're actually at? Like, it feels like such wasted energy to try to be what he wants you to be, instead of going, I don't know what you want me to be. Like, I'm mad. Let's talk about this. That seems less energy taking.
For sure. And I think one of the surprising things to me is that within evangelicalism, we often pride ourselves on being super biblical, right? Oh, Like we walk in accordance with the scriptures and everything else. Fascinating. We've talked about this missing piece within the North American church, and yet, I mean, you look at the prayer book of Israel and the prayer book of the church called the Psalms. There's a lot of wrestling in there.
They're messy, man.
I mean, this is not God. Our agreement's not working out here. You're like, to the point of, you're not living up to your end of the bargain. Come on, God, do something. We've got Job. We've got Jacob. I mean, there's story after story of people encountering God. And yet, I think the word you said, we're scared to. It's fearful for us. And beyond just it being fearful, like to actually do this biblically, you said to engage in community, get into the scriptures together, find out what's there. When you think of kind of those classic biblical examples of what Theomaky really looks like lived out, where do you look? I mean, we mentioned Job, but in the Psalms, but even into the New Testament, where are we seeing this as essential to the community of faith and our walk with God?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody really wants to study this, a great book to start is with the book of Job, which is the most highly misunderstood book in the Bible, in my opinion. It is my favorite book. It's dark and macabre. I get to have that be your favorite book, but it is generally historians believe it's the first book ever written for scripture. So it's the oldest, holy, scripture kind of that we have. And I think in there, if we wanted to look at kind of the actual step-by-step process of going through a season of Theomaky, Job is a great, study, because it starts with just complete raw emotion. And Job's church friends were totally there for it, sat with him for a while. But at some point, and this is where I feel like Theomaky is okay in church for a point, but at some point,
reach a limit.
Yeah, at some point we're like, okay, but pick it up, buddy.
Yeah,
and
you
put
get
on
over
your
this
happy
now.
face,
Yeah,
right?
get over it.
Yeah, get over it. Like, it's been a while now. Like, are we not there yet?
Yeah.
And that's where Job's friends came. And then there's that isolation and that sense of, I'm entirely alone in this journey. And that is a very real part of this journey, is realizing it is just you and God at the end of it all. There is no human that walks with you through the darkest moments of your life. It really is just God. He is the only one that knows you enough and knows you better than you to be able to walk with you. And then it's an engagement with, okay, what are the truths I've been taught? What are these things that I've always believed are true? Are they true? And really wrestling. And so Job is wrestling with his friends, representing what they believe God would say to Job. And the truth is, Job is referencing, he's talking to God the whole time. I'm not convinced he's talking to his friends. And then at the end of it, God steps back in the picture. And what you need to understand is Job. So this is where I feel like I get some basis to be able to claim that God uses this, that he intentionally initiates these seasons. The book of Job starts with God and Satan basically making a bet, a holy wager on Job, and whether his faith is actually real, or whether it's only there, his love for God and his faithfulness to God, if that's only there as long as God blesses him and gives him everything he wants and needs. So Satan, of course, is saying, of course he loves you. You've given him everything a human could ever want. Take that away, what do you have left? And then, of course, there's that slow, like lots of things in quick succession happen in Job's life that take absolutely everything away from him. And he's left like disfigured and broken and like wounded and grieving. Yeah. And so then finally, and then God really leaves the picture in terms of an active participant in that story. It becomes the people representing him, I say that in quotations, is Job's friends, speaking on behalf of God, and speaking about the truths and the doctrine about God that they have always understood.
Yeah, it's religious worldview. Yeah.
Yep.
We know how to make sense of this for you.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're wrong. And you've done something wrong. Clearly, you've pissed God off. Can I say piss? But anyway, pissed God off.
Oh, you just did.
Now you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not until the last couple chapters that God steps back as an active participant in the book of Job and basically gives Job a sound spanking, like a good parent, going, okay, big man, you've had a lot to say about me. How about you speak to me face to face instead of just going around behind my back, kind of,
Yeah.
and really repositions who he is in the universe and in Job's life and in the life of all humans. And Job comes to a place where he's chastened but reassured, I think, back into a proper alignment with his role. He bows in worship. And then the really interesting piece about Job for me, and this is what redeems all of it for me, is that God turns to Job and says, so these bozos over here, if you don't pray to save their sorry hides, I'm done. Like they're toast. And Job, of course, because he's like Job, prays for them and saves them. And then God gives him back everything double, right? That he
Mhm.
lost. But God initiated that entire process. I mean, Satan did, but that's what he does. But God let it happen, right? He initiated it and said, absolutely. I believe in the character of this person. Go for it. And that's troubling to me,
Mhm.
really troubling to me.
Some would call it cruel. Like, isn't that cruel of God? But you don't see it that way, or do you? Is it?
On some days, I find it cruel. Some days he looks like a privileged dilettante. Some days I think he seems like he's wise and brave parent, because I mean, I'm not a parent, but I have spent my career working with troubled and at-risk youth. And there's times where it's your work with them has to be, you have to take the risk of losing them to their own devices and to their own journey to get them back. And that's a really painful reality, I think, of when you love somebody, to release them. So some days I see God's role in that context, that he profoundly believes in Job through
Mhm.
it all, and needs Job's friends, needs future followers of God, and Christians to know that this is this is life, and it's messy, and it's okay to bring all of that to God, because Job is like spicy. Like he doesn't
Mm,
hold anything back. Like,
not at all.
I feel like there's nothing people have said to me that they were worried was blasphemy, that Job didn't say in worse. Like,
Yeah.
he thinks God
Recorded as sacred
is a
text for
thug.
us. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's an interesting point, Lisa, is that whole idea that, we do talk a lot about believing in God. Do we often pause to consider that God believes in us?
Mhm.
To say, uh, what is truly true about my kids? And honestly, as I go back and forth too, but on my good days, I guess you could call it, I look at Job and it's like the most loving thing God could do was this journey that brings Job deeper into God himself and deeper into the understanding of himself as a human. And of course, Job is the oldest book we have because it's the most common human experience of,
Yeah.
can we answer this question of wrestling and suffering? And it puts us on that journey. Okay, I want to ask you. So we have Theomaky, what inspired you, why it's been missing, the whole idea of Job. And I think this next question I got to bring up here. So here we are, right down to practicalities, the implications. Even as you were writing your thesis, I think even as we talked before, you really wanted this to be an invitation to the church. Like, this wasn't just Lisa writing her journey for Lisa's sake. It really was about, there's something here that I want to benefit the church and benefit church leadership. So what are the implications for a community of faith that engages, that chooses, because I think it is a choice. We can choose to ignore, we can choose to
Mhm.
redefine, we can choose to all sorts of things. But a community of faith that says, we're actually going to engage in this journey authentically. We're not going to put time frames on people who are wondering and questioning, hey, you got 6 days before next Sunday to get your stuff figured out, but to say, no, we're in this, and we're going to see it through, whatever seeing it through means. So what are the implications that you think for a church, a faith community, big or small, doesn't matter, a community of faith, people that come together in God that would engage in this authentically? What's the implications?
Um, I think, well, first of all, I mean, obviously, I did want this to be something that would invite conversation, right? And would change the expression and it would add some complexity
Mhm.
to the North American church, to our church for sure. Um, but I actually, I don't feel like it's what I wanted. I feel, and I'm careful about saying God had a word, but I do feel like this is a word that God has entrusted to me, that he wants spoken and he wants highlighted and he wants the church to hear. Because I think there's a lot of wounded people that are walking out of church and feeling that the only way they can find safety to explore their doubts and their questions about the claims of Christ and the church, is to explore that outside of the church context. And that
That
is the
safety word's
absolute,
really important, hey? Like, where
yeah,
someone feels safe enough to do that and not threatened. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Yeah, sorry, I
yeah.
cut you off there.
No, that's okay. I it's such a vulnerable time when you're in there. Like, I know there's a maybe a perception that people are in a rebellion, they're rebelling, and that there's some pride. And of course, there's always pride and rebellion with everything we do. We're a broken lot. But I think it's an excruciatingly vulnerable, painful period of time. And there needs to be space and there needs to be safety, because the world does not have the answers for this. It
Mhm,
just doesn't. And the enemy is thrilled to offer replications of things, but it's not the truth, right? And the end is destruction.
mhm,
And so the only place to find the truth of this stuff is within the community of God. And there's safety there as well, because you start to go and on a journey when you're questioning this stuff. It's easy to go, well, if I don't even believe this stuff is real anymore, why am I denying myself the
mhm,
pleasures that not being a Christian can offer us, like sex, drugs, out, whatever, right? Sex, drugs,
mhm,
and rock and roll, whatever those are. It's easy to start to live your life in a way that doesn't, lend itself to an easy walk back to God if and when you want to. So the community of God, understanding this, embracing this, and supporting this, I think is really critical for people continuing to walk in the same direction that they, were on when the horizon was right and made sense. So that when the horizon rights itself again, they haven't made a whole lot of life decisions that they now have to regret and baggage they have to carry behind them. So I
mhm,
think there's some really critical pieces about safety there. I also think we don't understand God if we don't understand this. He did not create us to be robots that smile and pretend that we are happy with Him. He wants to be in relationship with us. And that's so, as real as my relationship is with the important people in my life, He wants that same connection with me. And that means that this side of full revelation, we don't know everything about him. We don't understand why he makes the decisions he makes. And when somebody makes a decision in my life, and I'm frustrated with the decision they make, i'm I bring it up with them, we talk about it, we wrestle that
mhm,
through, there's conflict. I think we have in us a desire to be loved, even in the midst of being fully known, that somebody would still choose to love us if they knew all about us.
mhm,
I feel like that actually is the imprint of God. I think he also wonders, would you love me if you knew everything that I had in store for you? Would you still choose me? I
mhm,
think that's a God question. I think he wants to know that. I don't know what that means in terms of him knowing everything, but I do think there's a longing for deeper connection that goes far beyond what we what most of us probably have been taught is a relationship with God. And so I think the implications are, we don't know God fully. And we get that. Nobody does. But there's a really key part of how he operates that we are entirely blind to and really uncomfortable with. The more I have learned about God in social work and seeing in the midst of just depravity and suffering, the riskiness of how God works is like not the God I grew up with,
Mm.
right? He is far riskier. He is far more profound and way more mysterious and frankly maddening than I ever anticipated that he was. But I like that.
Hmm.
If he was the God I could figure out and put on a flannel board, I
No,
think I
for
would be
sure.
out.
Yeah.
I don't want it. Right.
Yeah. When he's good, but not tame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is.
And
Yeah.
we
He's
find it
wild.
out for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, last question for you, Lisa, before we wrap up here. So someone's hearing this and they would love to be honest about their journey, and maybe this is the start, is just to say, hey, there's this thing that I'm feeling that's authentic and real. What my wrestle is real. And yeah, we can affirm that. Doesn't mean you're a bad person or a bad Christian. To wrestle is in the very nature of the relationship with God. I mean, just look up what the word Israel means. And
Mm-hmm.
Jacob gets his name changed. That's an interesting little study. But if someone wanted to start and say, I want to investigate, I want to be in community, and not, we talk deconstruction. Sometimes we can deconstruct to the point that there's literally nothing left. But
Yes.
deconstructing community for something to be recreated, for creation to happen. So wherever someone is in that journey, if they want to begin or step into that, what do you suggest? How does someone do this?
Um.
Call you?
Yeah. Well, by all means.
Yeah.
And Harv Michelis, he's a great
Yeah.
person to call. He's probably going to be like calling me going, what did you just
What?
do? I think Wade, you have a great capacity for this as well. And I think so those are some, yes, absolutely reach out to people. I'd say be careful who you reach out to, recognizing that this is not a practice or an understood part of God or our relationship with God generally yet. So be careful of who you ask to support you because you could get harmed. I also think if God brings you to somebody, then take the risk. Even if they don't handle it well, He will take care of you in that process.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say this isn't something to blithely or flippantly go, okay, let's just throw on some boxing gloves and throw the first punch. I'd say wait for like if this is resonating with you, you may already be at the start of that journey. So
Agreed. I think it's
explore
born
that
out
with
of
God and what
experience,
that
right?
means.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
it's actually born out of experience. Like, it's not just this cerebral thing of like, oh, I'm going to wrestle with God now. I think it is that, oh, I am wrestling. Now I have a
Yes.
name for it.
Yes.
Now I've got a framework to perhaps understand that I'm not just going completely spiritually crazy. But yeah, to your point, Lisa, if this is resonating with you, oh dear viewer, it means that you're already in it. It has begun. And yeah, whatever we can offer in walking this out together. And it's not that any of us are experts in this either. I think that's an important, like, no, none of us have this. I mean, Lisa's further ahead than me, but all of us in the journey together. So wherever you are, be there and let's figure it out together. I think that's
Well, and
pretty
each
clear.
individual person's journey is their journey, right? So the
For
way
sure.
I've done this is not the same as other people either, right? And that is a learning, right? To hold, like a big term in the work that I do is hold space, but it really means just sitting with it and not feeling like if you don't have an answer, don't offer one, but
Mhm.
just being there with the person to go like, I've heard what you said. I empathetically am here with you. I don't know what to say, but I'm with you. That's sometimes enough being on the end of receiving somebody in this journey. If you're in this journey and you're really questioning if you are like you're not sure what you believe anymore and what's up is down and what's down is up, reach out because you're not alone. And there's lots of great so my why answers have never been answered by God. Trust me, that will be one of the first things he and I talk about face to face. So I rarely get my answers. Where I end up is at peace where I'm at.
Mhm.
So we have not settled a lot of our arguments, but the need to settle them goes away, but peace takes over that.
Mhm.
And I find space to still love him and walk with him. And actually, I feel safer with him because I know it's not up to me to act a certain way for him to be with me. And so, yeah, so I think if you're in this space, keep engaging with it. Find people in the church. Seek me out if you need help finding those people. And I think for church leaders, reach out and ask more questions about this, because there's people in your congregations we're unnecessarily losing, and they're
Mhm.
walking away super wounded, and it doesn't need to be that way.
Absolutely. Just as we close here, one way to get through to us, just go to the church website, rockpoint.ca. You can find me on there. Send me an email. I can forward things to Lisa. We can continue a conversation, even if you're not part of Rock Point Church, because who knows how far these things go and who ends up watching them. But you can still email us, and whether virtually, in person, whatever else, would love to see this become part of what it means to be true followers of God, faithful followers who engage in the reality and authenticity of life that's happening all around us. And so thanks, Lisa. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been good to get it out there now that it's done.
Absolutely. And congrats on getting this thing written. I think
Thanks.
it's not an end, it's a beginning,
Yeah.
right? Like this is the invitation into more. And so this is going to be up on YouTube. It's going up on some Facebook pages, so even communication through that. And let's just see if a bit of a revolution can happen in the days, weeks, months, years ahead, where this becomes part of the conversation of what it means to be the people of God. So that's what I would love to see happen.
Yeah, me too. That'd be awesome.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Wade.
Talk soon.